welcome on in. www.enswellboxingpodcast.com.
Enswell Boxing
083 351 5250. You can send your messages.
and the new Irish Boxing Podcast.
A very special episode with a very particular Australian flavouring to this, as we bring you part one of a two-part preview of Dennis Hogan versus Jermall Charl in the WBC Middleweight Championship of the World. And my co-host today is presenter of Australian Boxing Podcast Against the Ropes, Nick Nunan. Nick and I will look at all the different factors that play into the possible outcomes of this massive fight for Irish and Australian boxing. What was originally planned to be an episode ended up being a nearly 2-hour conversation, and rather than miss out on all the early action and previews, I decided to split it into 2 episodes, the first going out today with another one later in the week. We'll have a look at the promotion and all that involved, of course by Dennis's very own company, DDP Promotion, set up with some of his very, very close friends. We'll also have a look at the ramifications and how this fight will affect Irish boxing, and we'll look at everything else, past, present, and what it may lead to in the future. And as I prepared for this episode earlier on, a very special somebody says to me, "You wouldn't dare do an Australian accent. You wouldn't dare do it, would you?" You better believe it, darling. Jesus, Mick, you frightened the shit out of me. A shout out to Marco McCullough, who sadly announced his retirement earlier on today. Marco, a fantastic boxer, Belfast boxer, came through the underage system, came through the high performance unit, winning titles left, right and centre, and pulled out of his last fight just after the weigh-in, just before the fight itself, due to health reasons. And it transpires now that they seem to have played a large factor in his retirement, but health is the only wealth of any consequence in this real life. So I wish Marco and his lovely family all the very best. It's a sad day for Irish boxing, but it is of utmost importance that our fighters are safe, healthy and well. And another special word to mention is, of course, to our main man and friend of the episode, friend of the show here, Jason Quigley, back on the horse tomorrow night in Las Vegas. In LA, I believe. All is fit, all is well, looking like mean, hungry, ready to go, and certainly early signs are that his work with Andy Lee is paying dividends. So shout out to Jay. Thank you for your help and your contribution in the past. Looking forward to catching up with you really, really soon. So what I'll do is, I'll fade in and out of the chat that I had with Nick earlier on today. There was nearly 2 hours of chat. We spoke at length about lots of different stuff, and you'll hear us going off on tangents, you'll hear us shoot the breeze, more or less, about different things in boxing. And it amazes me how somebody that we've never spoke with before, never met before, yet have so much in common. See, boxing is niche all over the world, but they're mad passionate about their sport in Australia. So anything that starts to go well and people start to do well, they'll get behind it, won't they?
Oh, 100%. 100%. With Dennis, it's funny. It's funny. He's Irish Australian. So he plays sort of as a marketable sort of a person. He plays second fiddle to Jeff Horn and Michael Zarafa. But I'll tell you one thing. Boxing purists just know this. Who's fighting on the biggest stage right now that lives in our country? It's Dennis Hogan. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? So we're all behind him, but there's probably only a niche core of us, if you understand what I'm saying. Do you know what I mean? I'm very good friends with Jeff, and I'm very good friends with Dennis. And Jeff admits it right now. And I said to Jeff yesterday, not yesterday, the day before I flew out. I did the last session with Jeff before I flew out, and we were doing drills with his coach Dundee, his second coach. And I said to him, Jeff, 2 years ago, on 2017, when you beat Manny Pacquiao, Dennis Hogan really looked up to you. And they still do look up to each other, but he would have drawn some inspiration off you. Well, do you know what? Right now, you can draw inspiration off Dennis, because Dennis is in New York City fighting for that world title like you did against Crawford in 2018. And Jeff just sort of looked at me, and it went straight through eye to eye, and I was like, that touched him. You know what I mean? That sort of, that hit a spot. That Dennis is the forefront of boxing in our country.
Really? That's how much he's come on.
He has to. This is the thing, you know what I mean? People have got to realise, you know what I mean? If you're going to talk boxing, you can talk about Australian versus Australian, and if you've got 2 Australian fighters that are in the top 10 of the world, you can say one of them up. But I can't say Michael Zarafa is fighting on the bigger stages in in world boxing because he's not fighting on the world stage. And that's no offense to Jeff, but he's fighting Jeff Horn in sort of like an intermediate sort of battle in Australia.
And do you know the ironic thing, if you want, Nick, for want of a better word, is when Kell Brook beat Michael Zarafa over here, he was ridiculed for it. He was absolutely...
Yeah, but was Kell Brook ridiculed, or was it...
It was all about Zarafa and what he had been in the past. What if he'd been a model or a stripper or whatever? The whole narrative was that Kell Brook couldn't really win. When he won the fight, but he was only fighting a guy who was a stripper. Yeah. If he lost, Kell Brook is this, is that, is that. No matter what he did, nothing was good. Yeah. Now, you fast forward to a couple of months ago, and you go look at Zarafa beating Jeff and what that set up. What does that say then? History will always look back and
I think Michael Zarafa's efforts against Kell Brook was absolutely phenomenal in the latter part of the fight. I wouldn't say Kell Brook was probably at his top, but I don't think Kell Brook has been the same fighter since he lost to Golovkin.
Golovkin destroyed him.
Golovkin mentally destroyed him, and then Errol Spence, who I deal with a bit, Errol Spence come over the top of him and really put him away. So I don't think he's been the same fighter since then, but you can't take that away from Michael Zarafa. No. Michael Zarafa went over there, fought him in Sheffield in his backyard, and took him 12 rounds, but they all thought he'd knocked him out. So,
and before we get into unfolding and unwrapping what may or may not happen on Saturday night, I guess it makes sense at this point where we look at how we got here. We talk about the fight with Munguia, all that went on during and after.
It's a funny, and like, you look at Dennis with Mungua earlier this year, back in April, May, Mungua did not want to go near that rematch one. Let's get this guy to 100. I'm going to move up to 160 pounds and get well away from it because Dennis had their measure.
And all you have to do is, again, in between rounds and in between everything, and you look at the rounds, and I looked at it, you look for the small things, and you look for, like, when you're, if you were being down on yourself or negative, you think, well, what could I see that the experts haven't seen? But experts be damned. You look at the fighter in between rounds. Look at Dennis Glenn. Look at Munguia and his corner.
Correct.
He didn't know what was going on. It was carnage. He was, am I winning? Where am I? What am I? What's happening? Where are we going? He couldn't do what he wanted.
Exactly. He was taken into deep waters by a very, very experienced fighter. And that's one thing Jermall Charlo has to look out for on Saturday night. That he's got to remember one thing. You're fighting a 34-year-old experienced fighter. You're not fighting another one of these young American fighters that are not of experience and around about 26, 27 and might have had 34 fights. I always say one thing, me and Glenn talk about this all the time. Sometimes you can have 35 fights and be 35-0, but not have had the experience as a guy that might have 18 and the guy might be 18-4 with one draw and he's had a total of 24 fights. But he's had 6 or 7 really threshold fights. Dennis has had some threshold fights. He's had some tough fights that have gone down to the wire, Like, you ever look at some of the fights with, Jamie Weech, Kelly, even Nanaka, some of those fights, if you have a look at even Mungua, they're fights that go right down to the latter parts of the round where you strategically have to outthink your opponent. And that's what he did against Mungua, like you said. Mungua didn't know what was going on, and that came down to experience. And looking back on it, I don't know how old is Mungua? Is he 25 or 24?
He was at the time, I think he was. But
24. So he's going to learn a lot from that. But I'll tell you one thing, when Oscar De La Hoya and Ray Beltran and all them guys were like, oh no, we don't want to do that again because we completely fucked that one right up.
And again, you're looking at it and you're talking about all the body language, everything after the fight. It speaks volumes. Sometimes, as
even
I said,
during the fight, like you look at De La Hoya's body. I've got footage of De La Hoya's body language during the fight. De La Hoya he was sweating. He was looking across. He didn't know what was going because they thought they were going to get Dennis Hogan out of there in 6 rounds. Yeah. Well, it's the same thing with Jermall Charlo on Saturday night. But I'll tell you one thing. This is where I have more respect for Charlo, to be honest. Than I do for Mungua, is Jermall Charlo, he's not going to underestimate Dennis's experience like Mungua did. I think he knows that he's in for a very, very tactical fight if it goes into the 5th or 6th round.
Yeah, Munguia was a one-dimensional fighter, I believe. I think he was built up on the power, and when he wasn't able to get himself into a position to unleash that power, and then when he did, it didn't have the effect that he thought it was going to have.
But this is another thing too, Al. You know, when you come back and we speak about Glenn Rushton, this is around the planning that Glenn goes into, the game plan that they had for Mungua. That's what I think frustrated Mungua the most.
And he didn't know. He couldn't get it was to 12 rounds. I won't say perfect because there's no such thing as perfect, but it was 12 rounds of strategy that the man Dennis told me on that phone call. Are you recording now? Are you?
Who, me? I'm not recording anything. I'm not recording anything.
What way, are you going live? Is that what you're at?
No, I'm just sitting here.
All right. So what way is your plan then for the pod? Oh, you're going to come onto mine and then okay, cool. And I send it on. Perfect. I was saying 12 rounds. Dennis told me in the about 10 weeks out from the Munguia fight, and I got him then about 4 weeks out from it, and he was absolutely exhausted before it was. And I promised, I said it to myself in mental note, I'm not ringing anybody at that stage of camp again. The energy you could hear by him, they were in the trenches, you know what I mean? And now he was still Dennis, but you just knew. Yeah, and I thought, no, I shouldn't have done that, so I wouldn't do it again. I haven't contacted him at all now. I'll message him later on. But he told me 10 weeks from that fight, Nick, and it makes the hair stand on my wrists here telling you about it now. He told me round for round how that fight was going to play out. And when that fight started, I was in bed watching it on my phone because it was the small hours. And I got to the third round, and everything he had told me, I was thinking, I said, shit, I have to get up. I'm getting up out of here. So I got up out of it, went downstairs and sat in the sitting room. Sat in the sitting room with my jocks in the dark watching this thing. If anybody had seen me, I probably would. But by the end of the fight, I was standing in the middle of the sitting room, swinging hooks and uppercuts all over the place. And it was exactly, almost to a T, as he had told me, what they were going to do, how to silence the crowd. That was going to bring pressure. That pressure was going to make Munguia question what he was doing. Why couldn't he do it? And then they get to it. And I thought, how does someone do that? You know, and...
Well, that the thing is, and when I did a podcast around about 6 weeks ago, the mindset of the champion that they call Dennis Hogan, if you listen to that podcast, one of the things that we speak about that, and it's got to do a lot with Glenn as well, but I really feel that Dennis is a very, very mindset-driven human being. And it doesn't matter if you're on the golf course with him or if you're in the gym with him dancing like I have, or we're singing or we're doing anything. He wants to beat you. He wants to be better than you, and he'll strategically break down a plan to do that against you. And believe me, he'll do that with anything he wants to do. When it comes to his core of boxing, he's probably one of the best fighters, if not the best fighter. I would probably have him there as probably one of the best fighters I've ever seen mentally say to you, Nick, this is how I'm going to do it, and that's how he does it. And it's actually remarkable, like what you said about the Jaime Mungua fight, is exactly how he was going to do that, how he was going to stay there early, he was going to draw him in, then he was going to start to rush him through the middle parts of the round, then he was going to absolutely fool him in the latter part of the fight, by the broken pressure rhythm fighting that Glenn and him do, and just frustrated the hell out of him. He actually told me that.
Yep, absolutely.
And that's exactly what he did. But that's the way Dennis is. And then when you touch on Glenn Rushton, my latest podcast with Glenn Rushton's around the heart of a champion. But if I wanted to really call it, if I had to do another name for it, Glenn Rushton's mental mindset is perfect for Dennis. Because they both look at it very, very, very similar. Their strengths are the mindset, the mind over matter, the strategic planning, the breakdown, the preparation, the go-to-war mentality in order to break down a fighter. So that's why they've become such a powerhouse. If you look back to when, and this is no disrespect to Dennis's other trainers, mentors, or coaches, but if you look back before, say, the Kelly fight. I think he's had 5 fights with Glenn. Nanaka, Kelly, Weech, Mungua, and now Charlo. You can see the progress from Nanaka all the way through to Mungua. He's improved out of sight. And one thing I always say to Dennis too, and I bring it up quite a fair bit, is when Pacquiao fought Jeff Horn in 2017, when all of us from the media and the press and Fight Ivan, everyone was in their gym. Dennis was there. I think you might have heard of me on my podcast. Dennis was there watching everything, you know. I mean, Jeff was there. He was the big limelight, Bob Arum and all this sort of stuff. And I think then he just fought Nanaka or someone or whatever. But you could just see the look in his face, like, it wasn't like he was jealous of Jeff. It was just like, I'm going to be there one day. I'm visualizing this in my mind. I'm going to continue to work my absolute arse off, and I'm going to get there. And here we sit in 2019 at the latter part of the year, and he is on the biggest stage that he can possibly get in world boxing.
Absolutely. And he when he came home, he said it to me. That's, you know, everything, the mindset. I've met strong-willed people. I've met mine, and I tuned into mindset and mental and that side of sport for probably in its early days when the likes of Tiger Woods was talking about it and Rory McIlroy then followed a little bit. It takes, like everything in Ireland, it takes bloody a lifetime to come around. But I kind of started to look into it and figure it out and see the difference that it makes. You know, when you hear Tiger Woods say that he didn't remember much about his early wins because he was in that tunnel, you know, that's scary. Yeah. Now, I saw that firsthand. Dennis told me before, he said, listen, when I win the title, he says, I'll be home in Ireland for a few weeks. Now, this is something special. Wow. This is talks. This to me is more than a champion. I say this all the time on the pod. Champions are more than belts or medals or entourage. They're real. And they don't try anything. They just do what they do. And people then follow. And he told me, he said, listen, I'll call over when I'm home. I'll see you, bring the belt. You can get a picture. We get a couple of, we'll have a chat. Your little fella can, and I thought, yeah, brilliant, fair play to him. Now, Nick, I'm real enough to realise that when stuff like that happens, I'm never going to hold someone to it because the schedule gets a bit crazy, everything gets mad, and stuff happens, and priorities and all that. That's the way it is, and I've no problem with that. But I got a call about 2 days before he went home and a message to say, hey, brother, are you home, or where are you? He says, well, do you want me to come meet you? And he hadn't won. Now, he sat at my table in the kitchen for an hour and we talked. And I knew by him, the man, his heart was broke. But he went into this mental, it was like, all I could say was, it was like a trance. We were talking. And I knew by looking at him, he was here, but he was in Monterey. His mind was going back. He was reliving he was probably reliving. And the truth of it was, he didn't do anything wrong in that fight. And that's what's so heartbreaking. He did everything right. And
that's the tough thing in our sport, and I said this to Mundine the other night. Me and Anthony stayed up on the couch for about 2 hours, and we were talking about all these different things, and I said, you've got to remember one thing, Anthony, in boxing. If we go to the judges, we put it in the hands of someone who has the right to have an opinion who results in an outcome.
Yes. And I honestly believe Munguia is the same. Munguia is being fattened up, lined up, all the way through for eventually to be fed to Canelo somewhere along the line. I think that's honestly what he has, and I think that.
What do you think, Al, about him fighting O'Sullivan? Because that's a good one for our Irish fans listening on the podcast.
Yeah,
O'Sullivan. It's funny. Mungu obviously had a fight after Hogan at 154, which was an absolute shit out fight. I think the guy was ranked like about 168th in the world, but we won't go there. But now he's going to get in with full props to O'Sullivan. He's a pretty crafty sort of boxer. Are they going to rob another Irishman again?
As much as I love Spike and what he's doing for boxing and what he's done for boxing, and his story is fantastic. If you get into that a little bit, he's a tremendous fella, really is. And his ball, he had a pop, and I thought it was a cheap pop. And I'm going to be honest by saying that what he said and when he said it about Dennis, I thought was out of order. It was more than a little bit out of order, and I said it at the time, I'm going to say it again. I think there's a time, if you fancy your chances against a fighter, by all means step up and do it, but certainly not when the fella's after been in a scenario that happened where he's had the rug pulled from under him and robbed. I thought it was cheap and bad timing. And I'll be honest again, I'll quantify all of that by saying it's not like him. It's not like him. He has a showman streak in him. He plays today, and he's built a career off the image, off everything else. He's a damn nice fella. He's a good guy, but I just didn't like what he did and said about Dennis after that fight with Munguia. I don't think he has the same set of tools that Dennis has that will cause problems for Munguia. I think he would be relying kind of on getting Munguia out of there, and I don't think that'll happen, sadly for him.
No, I think Mungu will probably kick him out of it.
Yeah. And just to close out this first part of the Hogan-Charlo preview, going to cover a little bit about Dennis's journey from Ireland to Australia, how he got in touch with Glenn Rushton, and how he's flourished since then. I always got the sense that he knew he had something in him. He knew he had a calling. He knew he had something. Now, maybe this is me being a little bit dramatic, but...
No, he did. No, you're not.
And he had a promise to his late granddad, who was a boxing icon in Ireland, a legend of the amateur game, and he had a promise...
Which he now has tattooed on his body. Yep.
And he has absolutely already, before he's even fulfilled his own dream, he's already delivered on that. But safe to say he left here with a dream, an unfulfilled ambition and calling and a promise. And he went to Australia. He built off over there on the expats and the support, and the Irish community over there, in fairness to them, got behind him when he started to build that. And he built he built a really good, solid career, and he worked the way up, won the junior middleweight, got the NABA, and then came the Culcair fight. Am I right in saying,
yep.
Nick, it was around the Culcair fight?
Jackie Culcair, I think it was 215, that one.
Was it after that he teamed up with Glenn?
He teamed up with Glenn in the first part of 2017. It was an amazing story. It was after he fought Ye May. He actually fought... The first fight with Glenn, I'm pretty sure, was with Nanaka, then obviously the Cali Weech, Mungu, and now Charl. So this is their fifth fight. But yeah, it was after he wasn't with, when he lost to Jack Culcair, he wasn't with Glenn, no, because I think he fought, don't quote me, I think Sam Columban after that, and then Ye Ma or someone. But yeah, his last 5 fights have been with Glenn. But look, I think he did a bit of soul searching after the Jack Culcair fight. I actually didn't watch a lot of Dennis back then because I was dealing with boxing, and this is no disrespect to Dennis. At FightHype.com, we obviously, and I say it to everyone, you guys only deal with Mayweathers and that. Well, yes and no, but we deal with the echelon of the echelon. Not anyone can just go on FightHype.com. I'm not saying it's good about the channel. I'm not saying it's bad about the channel, but Dennis Hogan wasn't one that we really looked at back in 2013, 2014. But obviously, when you fast forward, obviously he was still making some noise in the Queensland ranks. He was still making some noise in the Australian ranks. In Australia, but I think where he really started to come on was when he fought Jamie Weech. When he fought Jamie Weech, and then obviously, when he fought Caliente Weech, I think that's when the legend of Dennis started to really it started to fulfill in a different sort of way. And for those who don't know as well, Dennis didn't turn pro till he was like 26.
Yep.
Dennis is actually a late bloomer. You know, he'd have, as you know, back in Ireland and obviously in Australia, he had a lot of amateur fights before that. But a lot of boxers, if you look at Dennis Hogan at 34, and what's he sitting at now? I think he's sitting at 28-2-1, is that right? 28-2-1? 28-2-1, yeah. The thing is, he's got the mindset of a guy that's had like 36-2-1. Do you know what I mean? Because he's a lot older. You know what I mean? I look at Jeff. Jeff's 31, and I love Jeff. He's a good friend of mine. Jeff's 31. I reckon Jeff will probably retire at 34, 35. 2 fights a year. So, you know what I mean? Say Jeff's got only 5 fights left with him. He'll be retired at 34, 35. I can't see Dennis retiring until he's about 38, 39. And people can say, you know what I mean, you don't want him going on too long in the sport. Well, hang on a minute. Dennis doesn't drink. He doesn't smoke. His mental mindset, his diet, his resume, I've seen it every day. Everything's on routine. Everything's to plan, from music to this to that, and other little secrets that I won't tap on. But he does it. His mental mindset is he's not really 34. He's actually about 27, 28 in his mind.
And that's a scary. That's that mindset that
that's
I mentioned.
Scary.
It is scary because I saw
exactly.
him. I've never physically seen. I've never literally seen somebody in front of me. What's the word I want to say? Morph into it or it's like it's all he's sitting there, he's talking to me, but I knew by looking at it, it's if I'm being honest, it was kind of eerie to see. It was like a steel. It was like somebody put a curtain in front of him or over him, and it was like I've never seen it before, and it was like an aura. It was almost, this is getting a bit dramatic, but it was like you could almost feel.
No, I understand.
And he was in that place, so I can only imagine on fight night when the knock comes at the door, and that can't be faked. It can't be pretended. And if I see it and you see it, Nick, the man in the other corner has seen it, and I noticed that in the weigh-in for Munguia as well. If you remember, he started all this silly bullshit before the weigh-in. Do you remember that? And he got him to take off his bloody necklace, or took off his beads. Don't put your shoes on. And Dennis is like, what? And I remember looking, thinking, this is not going to kick off here. Dennis, that doesn't happen, you know. But that was what happened there for me. I believe Munguia saw what I saw in the kitchen. And I honestly believe it spooked the shit out of him.
Yeah. No, that comes back to that mindset that Dennis has. And he's funny, Dennis, you know what I mean, back in Brisbane, Queensland, you know what I mean. He'll get to the gym, and every time he walks through that door of Stretton Boxing Club, he is just ready to go, you know what I mean. I think to myself sometimes, he's just, you know, he has to drive around about half an hour to get to training. But he puts his little headphones, and I reckon he's got the same mixtape and the same music, but he's just mentally driven for it. And, you know, full props to him, you know what I mean. Like, you look at it now, and I said this on the last podcast, and I've said it to the media and other people here in America. You know, I mean, name a fighter in the last 5 years that have fought for 2 world titles at 2 different weights. I actually can't think of one. I actually can't think of it.
No.
You know, what Dennis is doing this year is absolutely amazing. Like, to fight for a world title, WBO at 154, get robbed, but OC won it, and now he's actually going to fight for the WBC. I know Canelo's vacated the belt, and Canelo's up doing work at 168 and 175, but Charlo is the best middleweight in the world out of all the 4 sanctions, and Dennis Hogan is going to go and take that belt on Saturday night. It's like a dream come true.
Let's talk a little bit, Nick, if I can, about Stretton Boxing Club and the main man. The man that I refer to you affectionately in text as the Master Splinter, because he's a guru to me. He's somebody who is almost waiting. The world needs to realise this man, you know.
I'm not saying this to blow my own horn, but I don't think anyone respects Glenn Rushton in the media as much as I do. And I know that because it's been proven in the last 6 months. I classify Glenn as a close friend. I classify Glenn as a mentor. I classify Glenn as an honest. He has integrity. He has trust. He instills belief. And that's why when you come to his gym, Alan, and I hope you come down there, we call it the House of Dreams, because the dreams that he's created in that gym is the most unbelievable things that anyone could ever do to some young people's individuals' lives. Do you know what I mean? Like what he's done with Jeff Horn, what he's done with some other boxers in there, and now what he's doing with Dennis. That's what frustrates me with some people. And we've got this thing in Australia where we're pretty, you know, we want to knock a lot of people, you know what I mean? And I don't know if it's an Australian thing or maybe it's just a human being thing, but, you know, certain trainers out there want to knock Glenn's, you know, way of doing things. Well, I'm going to tell you like this. Name a trainer in the last 4 years that has had a fighter that win the world welterweight title in the WBO. Then he actually went and fought Crawford after that, Jeff Horn, and obviously fought for the WBC 147 title. So that's 2 massive big world title fights. Then fast forward around about another 8 months. Obviously, then with Dennis Hogan fighting for the WBO 154 and now for the 160 BC. So Glenn Rushton's the trainer, guys. 4 massive big fights in the last 2.5 years. Can we find a trainer in Australia that's done that? I'll tell you right now, you can't fucking find one.
Yeah.
Excuse my language.
No.
You cannot find one. And that's what frustrates me. People go, oh, but he's not this and he's not that. Well, hang on a minute. Women lie. Men lie. I'll tell you one thing that don't lie, Al. Numbers don't lie.
And you know what it is as well? You're 100% right. He could do all that. A lot of the times you could say, oh, you've done this and done that. But generally you got to move your base and you got to move everything lock, stock and barrel to America. Take your cap in hand and see what you can get and take what they throw at you. These guys have stayed, they've built on what they've got, they've built on a belief and a steely mindset, and they've earned everything they've got. They've got themselves into mandatory positions where they can't be ignored, and it all builds off that. And what I want to try and scratch the surface on, Nick, I listened to the podcast with Glenn, and it just blew my mind. And I had bought into that a long time ago. I had listened to Dennis. With Dennis, it's a lot of what I found from chatting with Dennis. it's a lot of what he doesn't say that you kind of need to look at. It's like he'll start talking and you kind of say, "Oh, was there something? What was that?" Yeah. So he mentioned something, and I don't want to give away the crown jewels here, but it was rhythm and it was everything else. And I texted him about it afterwards, and he messaged back in his tongue-in-cheek way. But talk to me, I suppose, about... I know Glenn's background, and anyone that doesn't know it from the podcast here needs to go... I shared a link recently to that wonderful one he did with you. That's gone. I'll share that again as a precursor.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
But for the benefit of this one, talk to me about the Stretton Club, about what it's fostered, what it's grown, and what it nurtures on a daily basis outside of these world champions.
Well, Stretton Boxing Club obviously started off as a martial arts club years ago, and obviously then developed into a boxing club around about 13 years ago. It started off obviously with teaching people around self-defense, and I don't think Glenn's plan back 13, 14 years was to train obviously fighters to become, and I'll admit at the start, to be professional boxers. You fast forward obviously 10 years, they had various amateur fighters that were fighting at the Olympics. Jeff Horn, who fought at the 2012 Olympics, Cameron Hammond, Joe Goodall, who was doing massive things in the amateur ranks. But now, based off what Glenn has done with the likes of the Jeffs and the likes of the Dennises in the last 2 years, you're getting a lot of other young people that are sort of being inspired by Glenn's philosophies and Glenn's ways, and they're getting the best results out of themselves. We've got I didn't say we because I'm not part of the boxing club, but I love the boxing club. But Joel Camilleri, who's come up and joined the boxing club last year, just had a fight recently against Sam Columbin. And I thought it was the best he'd ever moved in his career. And I'd watched fights previous to that with his trainer before that. I'm not knocking his trainer before that. His trainer before that is a good trainer. But I think the mental side that Glenn brings to that, Al, was why Joel's a hell of a lot a better fighter. And then there's obviously some other boxers there right now, like the Andrew Hunts, the Cameron Hammonds, the Mick Whiteheads, the James McDonald, who obviously just suffered a bad technical loss recently. But you sort of have to, and this is not throwing too much away, you've got to, and I always say this, and I said this to Dundee yesterday or the day before. Dundee was doing some drills and he sort of said something to me, and I said, Dundee, you remember one thing with me, I only have an opinion on something. If I'm going to have an opinion on something, I know a lot about it.
Amazing.
I only open up about that. So with Stretton Boxing Club and with Glenn Rushton, you need to come and see Glenn, how he trains with these guys. You need to see what he does outside of boxing, what he does for these guys. You need to see how he gets them to tick. By not being that, you need to do this, and this, and go. No. Glenn doesn't believe in talking like that sometimes. He can get the message across by using different avenues of communication where you're just like, oh my God, he's actually just told me how to do it, but he's also inspired me to do it. He doesn't belittle people. He the way he does his training and everything is completely different. And the thing is, in Australia, some trainers are a little bit intimidated by him because of the ways and what he's achieved. And let's be honest. And another thing, what people have got to realise, and they say, oh, Glenn's not from a boxing background. Actually, he is. He started out in boxing. His uncle, who I speak to quite regularly, was a boxer. You know what I mean?
But isn't it funny, Nick? And you've ticked so many things there that I could like. First and foremost, the opinion thing, and I'm the exact same as you. I don't give an opinion. I don't want an opinion on everything. I really don't.
Because we're going to talk about Bernard Dunn soon, and I'm going to sit back and listen off you because you're an intelligent man. I'm not going to sit here, because I don't know about that.
And that's exactly the same as that. I'm not politically orientated. I don't buy into narratives. I don't try to avoid news headlines as much as possible. I keep myself informed.
Exactly. And we've got a battle on right now in Australia, Horn versus Zarafa. Now, if I want to get there in the media and actually say, hang on, Mr. Sam LeBruno, who coaches Michael Zarafa, you're a great trainer. How many world champions have you trained? How many world titles have you fought for? You've actually defended a world title? Glenn and Jeff had to defend a world title against the best 140 pound fighter I think I've seen since Floyd Mayweather. Mr. LeBruna, have you ever fought at that level? Have you ever been at that level?
Conversation over.
But you know what I mean? So why do we listen? And we do it in all sports, you know what I mean? And people say that to me about Mayweather and that, but well, hang on, have you ever been to that level? Well, when you're at that level, there's different levels to it. And when you get to that level, then you can speak on that level. Until you get to that level, you can't say anything.
And exactly talking about levels and talking about influence and talking about how he manages to... something I notice a lot about Glenn is, although recently he's enjoying getting under the skin a little bit himself. I have to say I got a laugh out with that one. But by and large...
well, I think...
That was brilliant.
The thing is, Glenn adapts with his fighters. He plays different roles, and I mean, a father figure to a lot of the guys at the Stretton Boxing Club. With Jeff's a different sort of style of guy, and he doesn't believe and he has to sell a fight to make it better. And that's not knocking Jeff. Jeff's not one of those person that'll get in there and degradate you and do all that sort of stuff. Jeff's a real gentleman. But in the last press conference that we had in Brisbane, it got a little bit heated, but Michael was sort of not across some of the things that he probably should have been across. And Glenn made a point to, maybe clear that up a little bit. And I'd actually probably say Glenn gets under Michael's skin a fair bit, you know what I mean? And maybe, Michael and his camp need to have a look at that. But I'm certainly don't going to think, with Charlo's trainer this week that Glenn and the trainer are going to go at it, and Glenn and Charlo are going to go at it. I think it'll be a bit more of a different sort of a vibe, because with Dennis doesn't really need Glenn to speak too much. I think Dennis can do it all himself.
Do it all himself, indeed he will. Indeed he will. That's the end of our part 1 of the preview for the big fight on Saturday night. Want to give a huge shout out to Nick, Desi, all the gang in New York that helped make this happen. And when this dream comes true on Saturday night, it is going to be special. Part 2 will be out later in the week. To all my Australian brethren down under, have a look Against the Ropes podcast. Stay tuned to DDP. We will keep you posted. Nick will have footage from inside the camp of what's going to be a momentous Saturday night. That's it from me and them until then. Stay tuned to www.enswellboxingpodcast.com. Have a look at the anti-social media pages all the way across. Get along to Dennis's page. Send him some love. Send him your support. Send him your thoughts and wishes. Let him know that when one goes to war, we all go to war.